Hey guys, I'm T and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, we make trendy and fun crochet tutorials twice a week. And if you haven't already, smash that like button, drop a comment down below, and subscribe to join in on the fun. For today's tutorial, we're making a modern V-neck top. Clean ribbing and a small V because sometimes classics are all you need. Speaking of, if you're looking to load up on your wardrobe with a few classics, you are in the right place. We have hundreds of modern crochet tutorials and patterns with even more dropping twice weekly, so consider clicking the bell to subscribe and you'll never miss an upload. Also, do me a huge favor and give this video a big thumbs up if you like it, or 2 thumbs down if you don't. Either way, it's a great way to show support so I can keep putting out free tutorials every Wednesday and Sunday. Now, it's time to get on the show, so without further ado. For this project, any category 4 yarn will work, but I used a total of 130 grams of yarn, and that's 215 yards if you're stateside. As for tools, a 5mm hook, scissors, stitch markers, and a tape measure. There is a written pattern down below. Use offer code TCDDIY for a discount off any $9.99 plus order. Enter this week's pattern giveaway by telling us if you prefer your yarn in hanks or skeins. I prefer skeins so I can work from it right away. Details for the giveaway down below. We're using 3 stitches for this project and they'll be as follows. Chain, slip stitch, single crochet, and half double crochet. This tutorial is made for a size small. You can adjust it for your size and we explain how to in the video, so let's get started. Getting this top started, we're all going to grab our category 4 yarn and make a slip knot. Then we're all going to grab our 5mm hook and start off by making a chain that starts 1 inch underneath our underarm down to where I'd like the bottom of this crop top to be. So I stopped right where my underwire would lay, so I needed roughly 4 inches or 20 centimeters, so I started with a chain 15. Now that we have our chain, we're all going to do our first half double crochet row. So block off that last chain and do a chain 2. Now that chain 2 doesn't count as a stitch, that's our turning chain. Then yarn over, preparing for a half double crochet, and into the chain that we blocked off, or the 3rd chain from our hook. Bring our hook down, into that chain, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through all 3. And from here, continue with 1 half double crochet into every chain, leaving the last one. Now that we've put 1 half double crochet into every chain, into that last chain, we're all going to do an increase of 3 half doubles. So yarn over, into that last chain, with 1 half double, same last chain with 2, same last chain with 3 half double crochets. Now we should end up with 2 more stitches than the amount of chains that we made, and now we're going to do a slip stitch row, and that is going to have to start with an increase as well. So how that's going to work, we're going to start with a chain 2. That first chain is going to count as a stitch for the following row. That second chain is going to count as our turning chain and flip our work. From here, into that second chain from our hook, we're going to bring our hook down, into that back loop, yarn over, and gently pull through everything on our hook. Let's do that again. Into that next stitch, insert into that back loop, yarn over, and pull through everything. And from here, continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. And we do want to make sure that we're not tugging too tightly after every stitch, otherwise the following row will be too tight to work into. We're now at the end of our row 2. So let's get started on our row 3, so chain 2 and flip our work. It is going to be a repeat of our 2 previous rows, but now our half double crochet row is within the back loop as well. So yarn over, inserting in that first stitch's back loop, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 3, and continue with 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last one. Now that we've put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, we're going to close off the row with an increase of 3 back loop half doubles again. So do that last back loop with 1 half double, same back loop with a second half double, same back loop with a 3rd, and now this half double crochet row is complete. And since we're here, we might as well get started on the following slip stitch row as well. So we're going to start with a chain 2 again. So chain 1, chain 2, and flip. Into that second chain from our hook, insert into that back loop, yarn over, and gently pull through everything on our hook. And from here, continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. From here, all we're going to do is continue to repeat our 2 previous rows until we now have an underarm portion that can stretch, remembering that it will have a decent amount of stretch to it from mid-underarm over to the side of the base of our neck. Now the height doesn't need to touch the side of the base of our neck, it just needs to align with it. And then once we have that, I'll meet you guys back right after a half double crochet row. So we are back and the underarm portion is complete. I have a total of 13 rows. This width is roughly 4 inches or 20 centimeters unstretched, and now from here, since we all should have ended along the top, we're all just going to make a chain that reaches our collarbone. So as a quick sizing tip, we want to make sure that when we're putting this up to ourselves, we are stretching it as if we're wearing it, but also we want to keep this tail end still roughly at 1 inch underneath our underarm, because otherwise it can either make our armhole way too big or way too small. So once when everything is aligned, we're going to make a chain. Now the height that I needed was just about 2 inches or 5 centimeters, so I went ahead and made a chain 10. And then from here, we're just going to do a slip stitch row all the way down. So blocking off that last chain, do a chain 1. Into that chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, we're going to insert with a slip stitch. And from here, 1 slip stitch into every chain. Then once we reach the body, 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. And I'll meet you back at the end of the row. So we are back and our first neckline row is complete. Now our following row is going to be another back loop half double crochet row, so chain 2, flip our work. Put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last 3 stitches. We made our way down with our back loop half doubles. Now we're going to close off the row with a decrease of 3 half double crochets. So yarn over into that third to last stitches back loop, pull through, second to last stitches back loop, pull through, and last stitches back loop, pull through for a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops on our hook. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through all 5. Now we are going to be decreasing into our slip stitch row as well, so chain 1 and flip. And to do our slip stitch decrease, finding that last stitch from our previous row's back loop, pull through. Also insert your hook into that next stitch's back loop, and when we have these 3 loops on our hook, yarn over and pull through all 3, and continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So we've just completed the first 3 rows for our neckline. All we're going to do from here is continue to repeat our 2 previous rows until we have a portion that can stretch over to mid-chest. So our back loop half double crochet rows ends with a decrease of 3, and our slip stitch rows starts with a decrease of 2, and we're going to end at mid-chest, like I said, and I'll meet everyone back right after a half double crochet row. So we should all have the first half of our neckline completed. I have a total of 21 rows now, and my width is roughly 5.5 inches or 14 centimeters unstretched. Now we're all going to do a middle row with no increases and no decreases. So we're all going to chain 1, flip. Put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. That is going to be our middle row. Then we can basically mirror everything we did here on the other side. So at the end of our middle row, chain 2, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last stitch, and I'll meet you back to do our increase together. So we are back. Our middle row is complete, and we did get started on the following increase row for our neckline. Now before I move on, make sure you're inserting a stitch marker into the top of our middle row just so we know where that's at. And now from here, we're going to do our increase together. The increases are going to be exactly the same as our underarm portion. So just to do this first set together, into that last stitch's back loop, an increase of 3 back loop half double crochets. Now that our increases are completed, increase into your slip stitch row as well. So chain 2 and flip. Into the second chain from our hook, insert into that back loop, yarn over, pull through everything, and continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. Our first 2 increase rows are complete. We're going to continue to repeat these 2 previous rows for the same amount of rows as our neckline decrease rows, making sure that we're not counting that middle row. Once we have that, I will meet you guys back so we can finish up with our underarm, but just as a really quick tip, remember that our last slip stitch row didn't have any increases or decreases into it. So I'll actually meet you back when we just finished our last half double crochet row, just to remind you how we're going to do our last slip stitch row. We are back. The increase portion of our neckline is nearly finished. We just need 1 more row left to do, which is our slip stitch row. I mainly just wanted to meet you guys back to remind you that the last slip stitch row for the increase side is not going to have any increases or decreases because we didn't have anything on this side. So right after our last half double crochet row, chain 1, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. I'll meet you back at the end of that row so we can finish up with our underarm together. So the increase side of our neckline is complete. My width is now roughly 7.5 inches or 19 centimeters, still unstretched. Now we're going to finish up with our underarm. So first things first, insert a stitch marker into the same amount of chains that we made that led up to our collarbone. For those of you that have my numbers, I made a chain 10. So along this side, from the top, I inserted my stitch marker into the 10th stitch. Now from here, put one back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last 3 stitches right before our stitch marker. So we've made our way up with our first underarm row, leaving the last 3 stitches right before our stitch marker. Now we're all going to do a decrease. Starting with the yarn over, inserting our hook into that third to last back loop, pull through, second to last back loop, pull through, and last back loop, pull through for 5 loops on our hook, then yarn over and pull through all 5. Then our slip stitch row is going to have a decrease into it as well, so chain 1 and flip. And starting this row with a decrease, insert your hook into that first stitch's back loop, pull through, next stitch's back loop. When we have these 3 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through all 3, and continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. And now from here, we're going to continue to repeat our 2 previous rows for the same amount of rows as our first underarm portion. Now, just as a really quick tip, these decreases are going to be done exactly the same way as the decrease half of our neckline, but once we have the total amount of rows completed, do a chain up 1 and cut, and then I'll meet you back. So we are back. We have just completed the entirety of our front panel. Now the total width that I have is roughly 10.5 inches or 27 centimeters unstretched. And now what we're going to do from here is just single crochet across the top of the entirety of our front panel. So we all should have ended after a half double crochet row, so we're all going to chain 1 and flip our work to work along the edge. All we're going to do is put 2 single crochets into every side half double crochet row, and 1 single crochet into every side slip stitch row, making our way all the way up and around. So let's get that started. Inserting our hook into that first side row, which should be a side half double crochet row for everyone. There's 1. Then into that same top loop with a second. Now everyone's next side row should be a side slip stitch row, so find that top loop and insert with 1. And into the next side row, which is a half double, insert with 2. And into the next side slip stitch row, insert with 1. We are going to continue on with our single crochet row, making our way all the way up. Once we reach the side of our neckline, just put 1 single crochet into every stitch, and I'll meet you back once we reach that last stitch. So we've just made our way all the way up to the top corner stitch. Now all we're going to do before we continue on with our 2 singles into every side half double and 1 single into every side slip is chain 1, just so we know right where the corner is, and insert a stitch marker into that chain 1 space. Then from here, continue on to repeat 2 singles into every side half double, 1 single into every side slip, making our way all the way up and around. 2 things. Once we're worked into the top of our middle row, make sure you're inserting a stitch marker into the top of that stitch so we know where the middle is. And just like how we did on this side, we're going to chain 1 right at this corner as well. Once we make our way all the way down, do a chain up 1 and cut, and then I'll meet you back. So we're back, and the single crochet row is complete. Now that we have this completed, we can get started on the back panel. And I actually already have mine completed, so I'm just going to be talking you guys through it. So the back panel is going to be done pretty much the same way as the front panel, but without any increases or decreases for the neckline. So start by making the same chain that we made for the underarm, and then we're going to do the same types of increases for the same amount of rows for the back panel. Make the same chain that we made for the front panel. Then from the first neckline row over to the last neckline row, just do back loop half double and back loop slip stitch rows with no increases and no decreases. Then close off the back panel with the same underarm portion that we did for the front panel. Then we're going to close it off with a single crochet row, pretty much the same way that we did this one on top. And for the back panel, we do still want to make sure that we're chaining at the corners and inserting our stitch marker into that middle stitch. Once we have the entirety of the back panel completed, I'll meet you back so we can seam it all together. Alright, so we are back. Once the entirety of our back panel is completed, we're ready to seam our sides together. So first things first, placing our front panel on top of our back panel, making sure that the ribbing that we have is faced along the outsides. We're going to insert our hook into the bottom corner stitch of both the front and the back panel, and insert your yarn onto your hook. We're going to pull our working yarn through and do a chain up of 1 to secure. And to do this, we're going to be doing an outside loop slip stitch seam to make it look like another back loop slip stitch row. So into that next stitch, into the front panel, insert only into that front loop, Next stitch into the back panel, insert only in through that back loop, then yarn over, pull through all 3. Again, next stitch into the front panel, insert into that front loop, next stitch into the back, insert through that back panel, yarn over, pull through all 3. And we're all going to continue doing this, making our way all the way up. When we don't have any more stitches left to work into, do a chain up of 1 and cut. Repeat on the other side, and then I'll meet you back. So now that everything is all seamed up, the next we're going to do is our collar, and as you can see, I already have one side completed. Now we're going to be doing the other side together because both of them are going to be done exactly the same way. So first things first, we're all going to start by making sure the work is flipped right side out, right side up. Then insert our hook into our middle stitch marker stitch within the front panel. Insert your yarn onto your hook and start with a chain 1. Now I've taken my middle stitch marker stitch out just so it's a little bit easier to see, but I'm worked into that middle stitch and I did my chain 1. Now it's going to start off the same for everyone no matter what size we're making. So into that same stitch as our chain 1, so that stitch marker stitch, we're all going to insert with 2 single crochets. So into that first stitch with 1 single crochet, then into that same stitch with a second single crochet. Then from here we're all going to connect it into the base. So into the base, it's actually just going to be that next available stitch that we have, working our way up our neckline. So just finding that next stitch, we're going to insert in through there, yarn over, and pull through everything on our hook. Now that slip stitch doesn't actually count as a stitch, that's just to connect. And we do need to work our way up to the following row as well, so slip stitch into that next stitch into the base. So insert, yarn over, pull through everything. Still does not count as a stitch, and flip our work. Now everyone's row 1 is complete. We all should have had 2 stitches, and now we're going to be putting 1 back loop slip stitch into that first stitch from our previous row, and then closing it off with an increase of 2 back loop single crochets. So finding the last stitch from our previous row, not working into any of those slip stitches, we're going to find that first stitch, insert into that back loop, yarn over, and pull through everything on our hook. And then into that last stitch from our previous row, an increase of 2 back loop single crochets. So into that stitch's back loop, we're going to insert with 1 single crochet, then into that same stitch, into that back loop again with a second single crochet. And now for the end of everyone's row 2, we should all have 3 stitches. Now getting started on row 3, we're all going to chain 2 and flip our work. Now for our row 3, we're going to start with a slip stitch into the second chain from our hook because we're going to need to increase into this row as well. So into that second chain from our hook, insert with a slip stitch into that back loop, yarn over, and pull through everything on our hook. And from here, continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. Once we're completed with our row 3, we should have a total of 4 stitches. Our row 3 is complete. Now we're going to connect it into the base again. So into that next stitch, insert with a slip stitch to close off our row 3. Then to work our way up to the following row, slip stitch into that next stitch into the base. Still doesn't count as a stitch. And from here, we're going to continue to repeat our 2 previous rows. So as a quick refresher, every even number row, we're going to be putting 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, and into that last stitch, an increase of 2 back loop single crochets. We're doing our increases for every even number row with a single crochet because that's actually a little bit easier to see and do rather than slip stitches, and it ends up looking the same anyways. Then to get started on our following odd number row, chain 2. Slip stitch into that second chain from your hook, and continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So every row should have 1 more stitch than our previous row. We're going to continue to repeat these 2 previous rows until this width becomes the width that we would like for our collar/strap to be. And once we have the width of our strap completed, I will meet you back right after an even number row. We are back. I have just completed the increased portion of my neckline/strap. I wanted my strap to be roughly 1 inch or 2 centimeters, so I ended right after our row 4, which ended me off with just 5 stitches. Now from here, we are all going to be inserting our stitch marker into the edge of that last row so we know where that starts and ends, so that once we seam this together, we know where to stop our seam. And from here, we're just going to continue on with back loop slip stitch rows with no increases and no decreases. So from here, since we're along the outer edge, simply chain 1 and put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, connecting it into the base the same way that we've been doing. Then flip our work, 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch again. We're going to continue to repeat those 2 rows with no more increases or decreases until we're worked into our stitch marker stitch, and then I'll meet you back. Alright, so we are back. I have done my back loop slip stitch rows until we are worked into our stitch marker stitch within the front panel. Now what we're going to do from here is get started on the strap. That's going to be pretty simple. From here, no matter if we end along the top or the bottom, simply chain 1, flip our work. Put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch and repeat that row until we have a strap that can reach up and over our shoulder to the top corner stitch of the back panel. Now this portion isn't going to have any increases or decreases, and also we must meet back right after we have a total of odd number rows to make it easier to connect to the back panel. Once we have that completed, I will meet you back. But a really quick sizing tip, what we're doing right now is actually 2 things. We're currently making a collar, so we have to make sure that this can fit over our head, but we're also forming our armhole as well. So once you guys have roughly the length that you want to try on, making sure that it can fit around your head, but keeping in mind that it does have some stretch to it. But also we want to make sure that our underarm portion isn't too snug, because once we add the border for the underarm, we don't want that to be too snug. But once we have that all figured out, I will meet you guys back and I'll show you how to connect it into the back panel. We are back and my strap is complete. Now I have a total of 41 rows. Now we're going to connect it to the back panel. So I've already flipped my work over to look at the back. Now all we're going to do, since we all should have ended along the bottom, is bring our strap down, making sure that it's not twisted, and simply slip stitch into that corner stitch marker stitch for the back panel. Now this row is connected, and we're going to continue on with the rest of the rows until we reach our middle stitch marker stitch. So just slip stitch into that next stitch into the base, flip our work, 1 back loop slip into every stitch, and just continue on with this portion till we don't have any more increases or decreases. Once we're worked into our middle stitch marker stitch, do a chain up of 1 and cut. Then we're going to repeat everything we did here on the other side, but once we reach that stitch marker stitch within the back panel, do not cut, because then we can seam it together from there. Alright, we are back. We have just finished up our second strap together. Now we're going to seam it up, but as you can see, I have already seamed it up. I'm just going to talk you guys through it because it is going to be the same exact seam that we did for the sides. So making sure the work is flipped right side out, right side up. Insert your hook into the corner stitches of both the front and back panel. Then do our outside loop slip stitch seam till we don't have any more stitches left. Then chain up 1 and cut. Now we can seam the front together. Now the seam for the front of our collar is going to be exactly the same as we did for the sides and the back of our collar. The only difference is that we don't have actual stitches to work into, we have a bunch of side rows to work into. But we still want to do our outside loop slip stitch seam to get a really nice texture along the front. So making sure that our work is flipped right side out, right side up, we're going to find the top loops that we have for the first side rows that we have for our collar. Now it's not going to be a specific stitch, so you guys are going to have to eyeball it, but I will give you guys a really quick tip. There will be some loops along the outer edge, and there will be 2 of them. Pick the loops that's nearest to the outside of our piece so that we don't get an extra line once we're doing our seam. But once when it's in through there, we're going to insert our yarn onto our hook, pull through and do a chain up of 1 to secure, and we're going to do our slip stitch seam. So let's just do 1 together. Into the front panel, we're going to find that side row, we're going to find that top loop. Insert into that top loop that we have, and if it looks like we have 2 stitches, just find the loop that's nearest to the front. Into the back panel, we're going to find that next side row. This is mine right here. We're going to find that top loop that we have, and if there's 2 top loops like this one, insert it in through the back because we don't want that extra line with our seam. Then yarn over and pull through everything on our hook. And just continue this until we reach our stitch marker side rows. Once we do a chain up of 1 and cut. We are back. We have just completed the entirety of our collar. Now we're going to get started on our underarm detail. It is going to be done in 2 separate parts within the front and the back panel. Then we're going to seam it up, and I already have one side completed and also one side of this side completed, but they're all going to be done exactly the same way. So just to talk you guys through it. We're all going to start by making sure the work is flipped right side out, right side up. Then insert your hook into the side row that's away from the neckline portion, the width that you'd like for the underarm portion to be. I'd like for mine to be just about 1 inch or 2 centimeters, so I inserted my stitch marker into the 5th side row. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I inserted my hook in through there. Now we're going to start with a single crochet row, working in towards the base. Inserting our yarn onto our hook, we're going to pull through and start with the chain 1. That chain 1 doesn't count as a stitch, we just need to secure. Now from here, we're going to be putting 1 single crochet into every side row, starting with the same side row that our chain 1 is in. So into that first side row, insert with a single crochet. Into that next side row, which for me is this raised row, I'm going to find that top loop and insert with a single crochet. My next one with another single crochet, and continue this until I reach the base. We've just put 1 single crochet into every side row until we reach the base. Now we're going to connect it into the base. Now it's going to be connected exactly the same way that we did for the collar. So simply find that next available stitch into the base, insert with a slip stitch, yarn over and pull through everything. Now remember that slip stitch into the base doesn't actually count as a stitch. Then to work our way up to the following row, slip stitch into that next stitch into the base, flip our work, and now put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So just finding that last stitch from our previous row, not into those slip stitches into the base, insert with a back loop slip stitch and continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. Then at the end of the row, chain 1, flip our work, and put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch again. All we're going to do is continue to repeat our back loop slip stitch rows with no increases and no decreases, connecting it into the base the same way that we just did together. And then I'll meet you back once we're worked into our last side row right before our side seam. Do a chain up of 1 and cut once we reach there. Then we're going to repeat everything we did here on the other side of our armhole. And then once we finish up the second side, do not do a chain up of 1 and cut, because then we can seam everything together from there. So we are back. We have just completed making our way all the way down to our side seam, and we repeated the same thing on the other side, and now we're going to seam it up. As you guys can probably tell, I have already seamed mine up, but all we're going to do is just do another outside loop slip stitch seam. So same as the collar and for the sides, just make sure that our work is flipped right side out, right side up. Then the last we're going to do is our bottom band. So we're going to make sure that our work is still flipped right side out, right side up, and then we're going to insert our hook into any one of the side rows along the bottom. Then from here, we're all going to do a single crochet row. So all we're going to do is put 2 single crochets into every side half double crochet row, and 1 single crochet into every side slip stitch row, making our way all the way around. The only quick tip that I have for you guys is that this single crochet row that we're about to do is going to be as wide as this portion can stretch. So once when it's completed, try your piece on, make sure that everything still fits nicely. If it's too tight, redo some stitches with a looser grip, or if it's too loose, redo some stitches with a tighter grip. So now that our single crochet row is complete, we're going to do our back loop slip stitch bottom band. So this is going to be pretty simple. I'm just going to talk you guys through it, making sure the work is still flipped right side out, right side up. We're now going to make a chain the length that we'd like for the bottom band to be. I'd like for mine to be roughly 2 inches or 5 centimeters. So I'm going to start by making a chain 10. Then we're going to do our back loop slip stitch rows with no increases and no decreases, pretty much the same way that we did for the underarm portion, making our way all the way around. Well, we don't have any more stitches left to work into. I'll meet you back to seam it up. So we've made our way all the way around with our back loop slip stitch rows with no increases and no decreases. Now from here, the last thing we're going to do is seam it together, but it is going to be the same seam as everything else. So just to talk you guys through it, making sure the work is flipped right side out, right side up, we're going to do our outside loop slip stitch seam so we don't have any more stitches left. When we don't, do a chain up of 1 and cut. Then right after that, we are all done. The last thing we have to do is just weave in all of our ends. And there you have it, y'all. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Join us on Instagram, Pinterest, or Twitter. Those links are down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Catch y'all in the next one. Bye.